Thank you very much to speak about that quite exciting topic and also sensitive issue. What I would like to do, I would like to start with a picture. I was around 12 years ago with a family on holidays in Croatia. And my son was saying, "Daddy, what are doing all the people in front of a bank?" And normally, if people are queuing in front of a bank, it's not a good sign. In this case, it was quite interesting. It was the privatization of a state-owned enterprise. It was the privatization of Riga Telecom. And people were queuing, retail investors, to get a stake in the company. And that was really exciting from me coming from a capital market perspective and seeing what the demand was, because the government at that point of time decided to privatize two companies. One was INA, an oil company, and the second one was the telecom operator, Riga Telecom. And as you can see, the demand by far exceeded the offering size of the country. And what was really tremendous is the demand from side of the private investors. Private investors knew the brand name of a local company. They said, okay, it's one of our companies. It's one of the pearls of our economy. I would like to become stakeholder of that as well. So it really helps to create wealth in the population because they saw an opportunity, they were able to identify with a company and they were willing to invest. And INA was the first one which became privatized, and afterwards it was followed by the telecom operator. And you can see here that the demand even increased. You had a retail demand of 1.7 billion euro. And having in mind that Croatia is quite a small country, it shows you how attractive the stock was and still is. Why did I start with that example? Because it's all the time good to know there are success stories out there, and it was to the benefit of the population. It was not family and friends who owned the company afterwards. It was a wider audience. It was institutional investors as well as private investors. Now, what are the reasons for a government normally to consider a privatization of a state-owned enterprise? Or what are the expected benefits on going to that road? Of course, the first one is increase the performance and the efficiency of a company. In some cases, for example, there is a fear that if you, for example, privatize an energy company, that tariffs will increase dramatically because the private investor will just squeeze out the money of the people. But it's not the case. What we have seen, based on that companies are run in a much more productive and more efficient way, they were in the position to lower even the tariffs. So the opposite is the case, which is not expected by investors, because everybody fears that the capitalist will take as much money they can, not seeing that the companies is acting in a competitive environment, meaning if you're not satisfied with the energy provider, you may take another one. And that is really the competitiveness will be one of the self-regulatory mechanisms to ensure that tariffs will stay at a level which is acceptable for the population. Another point is, of course, improved corporate governance. It will help if you have changing political parties taking position, that the management is focused on the task to improve the performance of the company and to improve the service level for the clients. And practical experience has shown that that can exactly be achieved through a privatization of the state-owned enterprises. But of course, not every state-owned enterprises will be the right one to be privatized. There has to be a proper selection process in place as well. And additionally, it has an impact on the revenues of a state. It will have a one-time revenue based on the fact that you get money for selling your stake. But at the same time, when you expect that the company performance will much higher than before, you will increase your tax income as well. And what was quite interesting is that it frees up also resources for the state. And if you had a chance to watch today in the morning the news, there was quite an interesting message saying the French government is considering to privatize Paris Airport, one of the national monuments. And it's not privatizing it to take the money and reduce the debt. Their aim is to put it in an innovation fund, the proceeds of a privatization, and help to create the future economy for France, which would secure additional tax income at a later point of time, which is quite a timely move, I must say, by the French government to consider the conference here to make the announcement, so we should be very grateful. Transfer of the commercial risk to the private sector, that is a very important part. Keep in mind the airline industry 10 years ago. 10 years ago, the airline industry was highly profitable, and everybody was saying, we have to have our own airline. Now, margins were shrinking, and you saw a lot of bankruptcy cases for airlines. In this case, governments who privatized the airline beforehand were quite happy not to own them anymore. So you can move the commercial risk. Then it has a tremendous capital markets development impact. Specifically for smaller countries, because in smaller countries, you lack normally larger enterprises which are listed locally and which can attract foreign investors. So you need so-called magnet companies. And what are the impact of such companies? If you are able to attract investors to the country based on the fact that you have a large-scale company listed, you normally see a so-called spillover effect. An investor who has a good experience with an investment in a country may consider also investments in other companies which are listed there, and that are normally private sector companies. So with one initial public offering, you may be able to attract investors also in other companies, and I will show you afterwards an example that is really the case. And of course, it will be a wider distribution of wealth, having in mind that normally you privatize companies which have a potential for future growth and good performance, and you let participate the population of a country in such an entity, you will help them to create wealth if it's the proper enterprise. Meaning the selection of a state-owned enterprise you may consider to partly privatize or to fully privatize is very important. Now, how can IPOs contribute to securities market development? It's on one hand, it provides diversified investment opportunities for the investors. Currently, they are stuck within a specific set of companies which are listed, but when you increase the number of companies and the industries which are listed on the stock exchange, you help investors to build up quite a nice local portfolio as well. And it helps also the local pension funds and institutional investors to find investment targets in their home country and not only abroad. So it keeps some of the money in the country to support economic development here where you need it. When you have the chance to increase the number of retail investors, normally with a part privatization of a state-owned enterprise, you will get a lot of media attention. And media attention has also an educational impact, meaning that people will say, okay, what is an IPO? What can I benefit out of it as investor? And what will be the wealth perspective for me if I go into such an instrument? We have seen that many times, for example, when telecom operators became listed. In Austria, there was the People's IPO program for Telekom Austria, where everybody got a voucher to buy up for a discount in the telecom operator with an additional offering saying, if you keep it for 3 years, we will give you 1 share for free for every, I don't know, 10 or 20 shares you have. What did it do? It created a new scheme of private investors. And the performance of the stock was well as well. So it really helped to create wealth, as mentioned before. It helps also to attract international investors, because smaller countries, like Austria is one as well, for them it's very hard to come onto the radar screen of investors. Everybody speaks about Apple, everybody speaks about Google. Nobody speaks in reality about smaller stocks which are listed in countries which are smaller in size and which normally have a different company landscape than the larger ones. But nevertheless, also the medium-sized companies and smaller-sized companies need investment capital. And they cannot only rely on the local investor base, they are also very keen to have international investors entering the market. And the state-owned enterprise, which is listed, can fulfill that because it will bring the country on the radar screen on the investors. They will invest it and will contribute to the economic growth of the country as well. Now, another problem, and that is specifically true for Latvia, is that we see active investors. Active investors are those which are stock picking and investing into stocks directly. And then you have a higher and increasing number of passive investors. What are passive investors doing? They're investing in funds which are following indices. And if a country is either not included in an index or only to a small portion, you will not get passive investors in the country. And we as a bank have currently an initiative going on to help the three Baltic countries to have an own index, because as a single country, you're not qualifying for developed market indices. And we are currently trying to find a workaround where you create a market really focusing on a Baltic asset class, which has a number of highly interesting stocks already listed, or others who may be keen to attract capital through the capital market. And that will be very important to increase the passive investor base here as well. And as mentioned before, the positive spillover effect on listed companies. Coming back to my queuing example in Croatia before, what happened after the 2 IPOs? 7 additional IPOs followed immediately afterwards. And all of them were oversubscribed. So that means the listing of a small portion of state-owned enterprises had a massive impact on the private sector companies looking for raising capital on the local stock exchange. And take, for example, Atlantica Grupa, where we as EBRD invested also in the secondary public offering, and we are still shareholder with 2% in the company. And you see here, they offered 96 million, but the demand was 4 times, it was 400 million. At the beginning, the company were only considering to allocate between 20 and 25% to private investors. But based on the seen demand, and also having in mind that the investors are also clients and consumers of the products produced by the company, they increased the share to 30% private sector allocation. So that's a very good example how the private sector, through one state initiative and government commitment, was able to benefit as well as the state-owned enterprise, which was listed. Now, what is the success if a government really considers to list parts of a state-owned enterprise? I think the selection process is the most crucial part of it. Finding the right enterprise where the government can say, okay, I can afford to privatize it either fully or partially, and the company must be the best prepared one prior to the IPO. And here I think the rule is time is more important than money. That means if it may take a little bit longer to prepare a company, it's worth it, because on one hand, the government will get out a higher value through the privatization process, and at the same time, the investors will benefit from it because they get a proper governed company with a proper strategy in place. And there may be already now SOEs in the country which are already fully prepared, and there may others which may need a couple of years to be in that position. So don't rush, select the right company. That would be what we have learned from our experience in our country's operation. Another important part is the IPO allocation. Are you looking only for institutional investors, only for domestic one, for international one? Would you like the population to participate in it? What we have seen in the long term, it's very important that the population can participate in the IPO of a state-owned enterprise, because they should be able to participate in the wealth creation and in the dividend policy of such a company. And I think we will hear afterwards from Board of Tallinn how they were able to attract quite a, I would say in my opinion, quite large retail investor base, which see a good opportunity for them to get higher returns when putting their money into a deposit on bank level. And of course, the listing place. The listing place is very important when one of the strategic elements of a privatization is also to help develop the local capital market. And in my opinion, and that's my personal opinion, it should be on the agenda of the government to have a view also on the local capital market development, specifically having in mind the positive spillover effects on the private sector. And if you help the private sector to improve their access to capital, that means increased tax income in the future for a longer period of time, which help to finance social projects which the government may have in mind. Now, another good case study from Central and Eastern Europe is Poland. Poland really did a strategic approach when it came to the privatization of state-owned enterprises. And they sequenced it over a couple of years, helped also to develop the institutional investor base and the pension fund industry. So they were coming from a supply side, bringing companies to the exchange, and at the same time they were developing the supply demand side by improving the pension system as well. And what happened between 1992 and 2014, Poland was one of the fastest growing countries in the region with 4.2%. And as you can see, the same like Estonia, but Estonia was coming from a different angle. And Latvia with 4.1 was also not doing bad. It was doing very, very well as well without privatizations. But now you can accelerate that. And the forecast for the growth in Latvia for the coming years, according to Latvia, for Latvia by IMF, is 3.2%. And to support the growth, of course, you have to open up financing channels for your companies. And what is really interesting to see is that Latvia will contribute 0.1% to the global growth. Can you imagine it? Latvia, 0.1 global growth contribution, which is really quite an achievement. And you would be able to accelerate that through improving the access to finance even furthermore. And what was one of the key elements of a strategy of Poland? It was to support capital market development and to create a vivid market which also can secure the liquidity you require to attract investors. Now, another example here where we as bank were able to participate was the privatization of a cargo freight company, transport sector. Sorry, no, that's the bank one. Transport comes later, BKO, which was surprised by itself by the large demand seen by retail investors. You see here in the different phases, the initial phase said, okay, we would only have to have a retail participation of 18%. When in the pre-book building phase, they saw, okay, there is more interest from a private sector, increased it to 30%, and finally the allocation was 44% to the retail investor base. So a tremendous success in that area. And another one will follow after I make a little bit of promotion for EBRD here. What we have seen is we are working in this area since 1991. So we collected a lot of knowledge in this area within the bank. We have specialized teams which are really focusing on pre-IPO, IPO investments, or even financing of state-owned enterprises in the way to become a privatized company. And we have seen also in the latest involvement from us that experience is very important. And we are more than happy to share the experience and open up the knowledge because we see that as one of the cornerstones to develop the private sector and to really help to support the growth of the economy in a country. So we have also a toolbox of various financing instruments in place, as well as technical assistance, where we can support companies to go that route. And that is one of the examples. That's a cargo company in Poland, where we participated in their IPO. We invested 37 million, and the total volume was 465. And we helped to improve the corporate governance, which was very important at that point of time for the investor base. Because every investor would like to see that there is a proper corporate governance structure in place to ensure a proper management and control of the company. And additionally, what is very important, that the company meets environmental standards as well. That is something we are taking care as well in our shareholder agreements normally. So that is one of our investments. Thank you very much, and I hope there are very interesting parts, and if you have any question, please don't hesitate.